All across the country, people are coming together to speed up what we can learn about health. The All of Us Research Program is calling on 1 million people to join us as we try to change the future of health. For your family, for future generations, for all of us. Visit joinallofus.org and find out how you can become one in a million.
Hi, everyone. Hello, and welcome to Aging Well with Dr. Neff. I'm Kelsey Mahaffey, the All of Us Project Director for 50 Forward, a national community engagement partner with the All of Us Research Program. September is National Suicide Prevention Month, and today is World Suicide Prevention Day, which is an awareness day observed each year since 2003 in order to provide worldwide commitment and action to prevent suicides. With me today is Dr. Amy Price Neff, a family physician trained in integrative medicine, and she's here to discuss this important topic and provide resources for suicide prevention. Research shows people who are having thoughts of suicide feel relief when someone asks after them in a caring way. And findings also suggest acknowledging and talking about suicide may reduce rather than increase suicidal ideation. So Dr. Neff, thank you for being here to help bring awareness to what can be seen as a difficult topic.
Hey, I'm so glad to be here and to talk to you and all of the audience out here on Facebook about this subject. It's near and dear to my heart. And can't wait. And I really want to invite questions from the audience if anybody has any.
Perfect. And if you do have questions, if you're watching, please feel free to drop those in the chat or comment feature on Facebook, and we will get those and be sure to address those at the end of the presentation. So before we start, I just want to give a brief overview on what the All of Us Research Program is about. And this is a new health initiative from the National Institutes of Health to advance precision medicine. Specifically, the program is seeking 1 million people from diverse backgrounds living in the United States to enroll and share their health data, making discoveries easier for researchers in the future, and then hopefully getting rid of our one-size-fits-all healthcare. We have over 400,000 people enrolled in the program so far, and you can learn more by visiting our website at joinallofus.org/50forward. So now let's get right to our presentation. Remember, those of you watching, if you have questions, please feel free to put those in the comment feature, and Dr. Neff will be sure to address those once she is through. And I know she's put together some fantastic slides and a presentation. So Dr. Neff, let's turn it over to you. I'll let you share your screen and give us this important information on suicide and prevention.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you all. Just to give you a little bit of background as far as the relationship I have to speaking about suicide. As a family practice doctor, I also worked in a psychiatric practice for about 8 years in Virginia. And it was only there that I really learned how to actually talk to people about suicidal thinking. And it's not something that gets that well addressed in medical education because it's not comfortable to talk about. But what I've hoped to bring to everyone is the opportunity to talk about suicidal thinking in a way that's kind of normal. Because, one thing that's true about all of us is that we all die at some point. And to begin to, kind of verbalize our sense of a loss of control over our own deaths. We don't typically get to choose when we die, and suicidal thinking is one version of a type of control. And I think this is particularly relevant as we get older because we have a loss of control in so many areas. So this is something that can get very complicated because people have different religious views around the idea of suicide. There's a lot of social judgment, perhaps, that one can perceive. I would say it's very much less so in younger people than in older people because of attitudes that existed when I was a kid. I mean, I'm almost 50. And then certainly for my parents' generation and my grandparents' generations, suicide was something that was very much not spoken about openly. So it might have even been a stigma for those left behind if a loved one did end up taking their life. Okay, so just right out of here, I just kind of want to bring your attention to this beautiful blue heron, this gray blue heron that I saw in a tree the other day. You know, and it's this lone figure at the top of a tree. And I think that for people that that have a thought of suicide or know someone who does, that feeling of being alone is one of the worst aspects of this situation and condition. This was a quote I came across from F. Scott Fitzgerald. It was only a sunny smile and little it cost in the giving, but like morning light, it scattered the night and made the day worth living. This is going to be a theme that comes up over and over again as we talk about suicidal ideations and suicide attempts, is that people's connection, you know, to another person is one of the most powerful tools we have in order to relieve this terrible symptom, this despair and contemplation of taking one's own life. So F. Scott Fitzgerald, interestingly enough, you know, he was a writer and had experienced suicidal ideations, as many important people that we're aware of have. I read a book not that long ago about mental illness in some of our most famous leaders. And one really interesting common thread that was documented was that Abraham Lincoln experienced suicidal ideations, Martin Luther King, Roosevelt. You know, these were all people who also in the history of our country were known to be very empathic, that they felt the pain of others. And so in some ways, you know, you don't necessarily have to look at your own willingness to contemplate suicide as a true pathology. It's simply an awareness of pain, you know, and despair and, you know, the thinking mind as a problem-solving mind is simply going to light on suicide as one option to relieve oneself of pain. But, you know, I hope I make the case today and, you know, that people in their communities come to understand that it's not a great option. And we hope to be able to provide the resources for people to feel wanted, to feel like they belong, and to be able to move past those painful feelings. So before we really get into this is just my work team. Of course, you're seeing me with no mask on, but this is how we normally feel here in our office. And it's a reminder to me of the community that I work within, you know, and the difficult emotions that we see. And every person on my team here in our healthcare setting is thinking about people's moods, thinking about ways that we can ask those hard questions. And particularly you know, I'm here on the right of your screen, and the woman on the left is my nurse. And so she's often going to be the one telling me, hey, this person just said that they were thinking about hurting themselves, on our screening tools that we use in the healthcare setting. So, you know, as a reminder, this is stuff that we do. And if you get asked about suicidal thinking in the healthcare setting, you know, don't be put off by it. It's something that we hope you get used to, you know, that it's such a common question, just like, do you smoke? Or, you know, do you have any family history of cardiovascular disease? These are just normal questions to kind of come across in the healthcare setting. So let's just pause, you know, for a little bit of awareness around what we're talking about. So suicidal thoughts are common. And I want to depathologize that as a theme. You know, it's something that is going to come about perhaps as a response to despair, or even just the wondering around death and dying. You know, there's a lot of opportunity just to contemplate this, you know, inevitable thing that each of us will experience. Thinking about suicide and attempting it appear to be really different phenomena. So particularly if you have a strong conviction around the thought of suicide as being kind of against your morality, please just take into awareness that thinking about it is just simply, a phenomena that doesn't appear to put you at risk overtly for completing suicide. Despair, isolation, disappointment, disillusionment, fear, feeling like a burden, chronic pain, loss of function. These are all things, emotions, and limitations that can drive the mind to imagine suicide as a solution. And again, that doesn't equate with some defective character. Older Americans complete suicide on average more than their younger counterparts. There was a question that was posed to me about why this is, and in the literature, the way that this is described really is that it may have to do with the fact that older people have more chronic illnesses and they're just not as resilient. So if they do make an attempt, they're more likely to succumb to that attempt. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the US. And the older Americans are the second leading age group after the 44 to 54-year-old age group. So it's not, teenagers. It's people in midlife and older age that are the most common completers of suicide. It can feel hard to discuss suicidality with loved ones, with caregivers, with healthcare providers, and older adults are just known to be less likely to bring it up in the healthcare setting. This can be because of the structure of healthcare, that you might feel rushed. You've got to talk to them about your diabetes and then you're feeling a little down and have had some suicidal thoughts, but it doesn't seem like there's space within the healthcare setting to accommodate that conversation. But I want to encourage you that it's really important to bring up. To the degree that there are barriers within the organizations of places like I work in, it won't be known unless you do bring it up, so pushing you and giving you a little nudge, that it should feel safe to talk about. And then finally, it does not increase a person's risk of completing suicide for you to ask them about it. So there can be a lot, again, barriers, maybe in the healthcare setting, like if I had a personal reluctance to talk to someone about it, then I'm going to kind of avoid the subject. But I need to overcome the fact that it's not going to increase a person's likelihood to harm themselves. I, for one, really like to normalize it, so I'll ask, everybody, have you ever had a thought of suicide or thoughts of self-harm? And even if they say no, I typically follow it up with, it's completely normal and it's really common. And I wouldn't think differently of you. Sometimes people also feel like if you admit to it, that they might want to institutionalize you immediately. Again, that's really not the case. So I think you can feel confident in your ability to bring it up in the healthcare setting if you have those feelings. Whoa. Okay. So this guy really reminded me of the despairing feelings that can come along with, events in life that might lead to a sense of not wanting to keep bearing the burden. But there's sun in the foreground and, rainbows often appear. So we have to hold hope that, like so many things, weather, feelings, whatever, it's going to change. I wanted to explain this concept, which is what the research world uses as a tool to understand suicide in the context of research. And as a general reminder, Western medicine is a field that is founded in research. We research things in order to understand them and to be able to come up with effective treatments. and therapeutics for that. So if you can imagine, researching suicide is really hard, because obviously, especially with completed suicides, you can't interview the individual. We can only take historical clues, and those aren't quite as accurate as interpersonal interactions. But I want to go through this because I think it really helps us understand what goes into a person's attempt or decision to complete a suicide. So 2 big factors. One is perceived burdensomeness. So when people feel like they are a burden, this makes them, it's an incorrect mental calculation, about their perceived worth, in life. And then the second aspect is thwarted belongingness. Like when you don't feel like you belong and don't have reciprocal care. These 2 factors appear to be the most potent in terms of increasing a person's thoughts of suicide and or attempts. So in the background of those 2 issues, when you become hopeless about the persistence of those 2 problems, having a sense that this will never change, that really starts to increase the risk of an attempt, okay? And then the final piece is if you feel like a burden and you feel like you don't belong and you become hopeless about the situation, the final piece to really ramp up your risk is whether or not you're capable of completing a suicide. And that has to do with access to means or a personal reduced fear of death or pain. And then there are some indications that there may be a genetic predisposition to this. And this has been illuminated by something that I find really fascinating, which is that eusocial groups, which are groups that are social, like so multi-membered groups, as opposed to animals that tend to live in isolation, but bees, mole rats, and humans, we have the ability to self-sacrifice for the good of the whole built into our hardwiring. So as you can imagine, there could be times in individuals where this hardwiring gets inappropriately triggered by some things that happen in the environment. And we have no idea what those triggers could be. It could be pollution. It could be bad diet. It could be, you name it. There's so many things that could go into that, but that might increase, the risk of ideations and or attempts. So kind of put it another way, this is a diagram of that. So, I'm alone, I don't belong anywhere, I'm a burden, coupled with hopelessness, that feeling that it would never change. And then comes in desire, I can't bear these feelings anymore. Then do you have the capacity to do it? Do you have the means? Do you have the temperament? So these are the things that kind of ultimately culminate in an attempt or a completed suicide. So there is that rainbow, and even though the rainbow, even though the sky is dark, sometimes all we need is the faintest glimmer of hope to kind of get that hopelessness to dissipate. And I would say particularly now, with isolation that seems to be amplified through pandemic or just the changes in how we do things, the kind of the increase in devices as our connections as opposed to in person as our connections. We're real risk for that sense of not belonging or burdensomeness because of our, the pace of life that we live. So I just want to kind of further delineate some of the risk factors and the clues that we can all be on the lookout for in terms of suicidal ideations and attempts. So loss of interest in things. So that's kind of a description of a depression. It's certainly a depressive like a feature of a person's mood that could be an aspect of a depressive diagnosis. but a loss of interest in things or activities usually found to be enjoyable. When a person starts to isolate on their own, not getting engaged with others when social opportunities arise, starting to take care of themselves less, grooming and hygiene. Again, these can be features associated with depression. Not taking care of themselves in the ways of, their medications, I would say a diet is another version of the self-care, taking prescriptions that would typically contribute to a sense of well-being. When people stop doing that, that's a clue that, that the internal environment is suffering. When a person experiences or expects to experience a significant personal loss, and this is clearly just more common in older people. We've all had more loss as we get older. A feeling of hopelessness and or worthlessness. These are things that, again, we typically want to ask about in the healthcare setting, like hopelessness and helplessness, another form of that. When you lose your independence, that can be a tremendous burden. When people start to put their affairs in order, give things away that would otherwise seem to be very important to them, or make changes in their wills, these can be clues. Stockpiling medications or other lethal means, buying a gun. Other clues include a preoccupation with death or a lack of concern about safety. Saying things like, "This is the last time you'll see me," or "I won't be needing any more appointments." I've certainly had patients say that, and it's typically it's a trigger for me to go, have you thought about hurting yourself, or have you considered killing yourself? As a young doctor, I was very afraid to ask that question. It felt like a box, like Pandora's box, that I didn't necessarily want to open. But it's been remarkable to me to watch how asking that question and exploring that with someone lets the air out of that energy that otherwise is so potent. When someone tells you that they're thinking about hurting themselves, that's something that needs to really be taken seriously. And one of the things that I would say is that the most important thing we can do in the moment is really express concern in a way that's not punitive. Okay. So not to say like, "What are you, because going back to that idea of burdensomeness, to have a kind of an earnest expression of self-harm, as a call for help, and then to be kind of rejected in a way is one of the worst things that we can do. So let's talk a little bit about what to do if you or someone is feeling suicidal. Let's say you are just feeling like a burden, or like you don't belong, or feeling pretty hopeless. Or if you are aware of someone that does, the thing that we have, the best tool that we have is community. So reaching out, connecting with others. In the healthcare setting, what I like to do is really think about the factors that would make a person feel hopeless and helpless. Pain, not sleeping. Not sleeping is a tremendous risk factor for suicidal ideations as well. When I know about someone in conflict with others, especially in their immediate community, that can contribute to that sense of burdensomeness or not belonging. Unresolved grief, as people experience loss and go through it. And then really being willing, to invite the question, are you thinking about hurting yourself or killing yourself? This picture, I put this in here because there's this tree that's holding up this massive rock. And of course it's not, they've ultimately become symbiotic with one another. Each one needs the other to survive. When that rock goes, it's going to push that tree down, and so we are in community, and it can look really ugly sometimes. It can look like it's not working. In fact, it is. So just as a reminder, don't be afraid if you're in that position of feeling like a burden or experiencing conflict. like to just try to work it out. So much of the despair that's present nowadays is just our, kind of being our stuckness in that world of the various factors that contribute to negative experiences. And, we just have to take the time to resolve things, and it's work, it's effortful. And as a society, it would really be great if we could start to work in these areas of justice and, reduction of suffering in people, food security, housing security, and community. Again, going back to that community idea. So this is a meme, it's a hashtag, be the one to ask, but it's a great reminder of the need to ask that tough question, and if you're in a community where you're seeing people regularly, it's great to be able to normalize the concept. You see somebody down, like F. Scott Fitzgerald said, like, go ahead and offer the smile. It's really, it's not a big effort, but it could be the difference. And there's some phone numbers here that I want to reiterate to you, and some resources that we're going to have posted on the Facebook page. And I think Kelsey said we're going to have those available just to repeat for people if you or a loved one is considering harming yourself. So this is a couple of dear friends of mine, and it's something that was a reminder to me about community. So this is my friend Anne and her daughter Karen, and Anne lost her husband, just a few months ago, and was filled with grief naturally. And, the three of us had a really good conversation around how we hadn't seen one another, and how for Anne, the loss of her husband, who had severe dementia for the last 2 years, he wasn't like her companion in the same way that he had been in their marriage. And in the care required at the end of his life was so exhausting that when he did finally pass, there was just this enormous void and vacuum. And while Anne never expressed any suicidality to me, she's kind of a setup for it in terms of loss and despair and a massive shift in how she lives her life, because she has been relieved of her caregiver duties. So it's a reminder of community and even just looking at their faces, these dear people to me, I'm thinking about like the loss that we've had in the pandemic for not getting together. So this is a list of resources for anyone that's experiencing suicidal ideations or has concerns or even questions about it. There are both national suicide prevention numbers and also in Tennessee. The Tennessee Red Line is a line that is designed to help people access care that are suffering from addictions, which is another common feature for people that are feeling suicidal. And then the National Alliance for Mental Illness, NAMI, is a great resource for anyone who either themselves or has a loved one that has depression, any kind of mental illness, just to get some support. And there are lots of groups in Davidson County where people can find that community that can be really helpful. I'm going to end here with cuteness personified. This is Phoebe. So she's my little puppy. And, for me in my life, one of my personal antidotes has been pets. They've been, especially with the pandemic, they've been a huge part of my ability to self-heal. And, and so to the degree that you're able, if you are drawn towards cuddly, warm mammals, try and fit more in your life. All right, I am missing my mouse somehow, having a hard time finding a way to end my screen share. But in the meantime, are there any questions? Does anybody have any thoughts or?
Yeah, thank you so much. This is Fantastic. I really appreciate you putting these slides together, and would love to have a copy of the slides. We might have some folks that have attended that would actually enjoy the slides as well. So if you're willing to share those, I think that would be fantastic.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And one thing you did mention as we wait to see if there are any questions, and people watching, please feel free to drop those in the comment section if you have a question for Dr. Neff on suicide or suicide prevention. But you mentioned COVID-19 and the pandemic and, people in isolation. And I was curious if you knew if there had been an increase in suicide, depression, such all of those risks in 2020. And do we know anything about that?
Are you still there? Uh-oh.
Oh,
There we are. Oh, yeah, now I found you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so in the pandemic, actually the rates of suicide have gone down. So they're down by about 6% over last year. And, we were just looking at this information before we started our talk. It's fascinating, but there's some speculation that after catastrophes, that the kind of the work of the community and the cohesion that exists and the shared suffering, again, shared suffering is a sense of belonging, whereas, suffering in isolation is a sense of not belonging. And there might even be that sense that there's more conversation around mental illness with the pandemic going on. I've certainly noticed that the marketing to doctors, for instance, the information that we get from Health and Human Services, the NIH, all of these entities reminding us to bring it up in the healthcare setting.
Yeah, I think you're so right. That makes a lot of sense. I love that even in suffering, that creates community. You don't feel like you're alone. I think 50 Forward as an agency also is a great example of how we've used technology to keep older adults connected. So those that did feel that isolation, it's almost that the technology piece and having a Zoom and an iPad that could help them feel connected to their loved ones and create that sense of community. So yeah, it's interesting. All of the things that have come out of the pandemic, they're not all bad,
Right.
things. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then before we close, I'd love to mention also and see your thoughts on this about how this can also tie back in with the All of Us research program, because one of the things that the All of Us research program does is incorporate mental health data as well as environmental data, genetic data, family history data. And so the program doesn't just look at your physical health, but rather all aspects of you as a unique individual that make up your health. And one of those factors is that mental health component that I think sometimes is left out of research. So I love that about the program. And I don't know if you have any thoughts that you want to share about research specifically with mental health and suicide, and programs such as All of Us that can help increase and push more research for topics like this.
Oh, I absolutely think that, participation in research studies, well, I have two feelings about it. One is that we need the data. We really need more information, and medicine by theory really doesn't work. And I can just give you example after example, like we'll have this great hypothesis, like bleeding causes heart attacks, because back in the 70s when they would open up the blood vessels, they'd say, see, here was, they bled in their blood vessels, and nobody was paying attention to the plaque under the blood clot.
Mm-hmm.
And that theory delayed our use of a known help, which was aspirin, by almost 20 years because it went against the theory. Okay. And so we really have to just be open-minded about how things work. And we arrive at closer to the truth with the information that we receive from well-designed research studies. Behavioral health research in particular is very biased by the pharmaceutical industry, which tends to be one of the few entities right now that actually supports the research. And it's just business, right? I mean, they're supporting research so that they can increase the products. But organizations like our government and the National Institutes of Health, when they do research studies, they are doing it in a less biased way. And we need more of that kind of research. The other thing that I'll say, though, is that participation in a research study has been shown to improve your health. So when you get contacted, let's say you had suicidal ideations. Well, so one of the studies that showed just a vast reduction in suicidal ideations and in suicide attempts and completed suicides was just 2 phone calls a week from a healthcare entity.
Wow.
Right? I mean, it's like pretty inexpensive and uncomplicated interventions that really appear to have a lot of impact. So for instance, participating in a research study, you just know that somebody cares, you know that somebody's interested in you and what's going on with you. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for that. And we have had a couple questions pop up in the chat. Dr. Neff, do you have a couple minutes to see if we want to address those real quick? Okay, so one is, how can you help a person suffering from severe depression? So I think we mentioned some facts in your slides there, but if you want to mention maybe highlight a few of those, that would be great.
Yeah. So, in general, if you have someone in your community that is very depressed, one of the things that you can do is just simply reach out. And I will preface that by saying one of the symptoms of depression is irritability. And so people who are depressed can be hard to interact with. And so if you can just take it into your heart that, the irritability is not directed at you, it's simply a manifestation of this illness. You can start to, I don't know. I mean, I honestly, energetically in the healthcare setting feel like I'm, breaking them out of the, the frozen ground, to kind of like nudge a little bit and cajole, and then get them into a space where they can be more appropriately assessed. You can ask the question too, like if they're really depressed, are you feeling like harming yourself? Are you thinking about killing yourself? These are important questions just to get kind of like the acuteness of the problem identified. If someone's feeling suicidal, that's a very appropriate use of 911.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying, and you've said it several times in our talk today, is so important to changing the conversation around, this historically avoidant topic. Just be direct and asking them outright, do you have these thoughts, and are you thinking of harming yourself? And how quickly, like you mentioned, that can just change the energy and open up space for somebody that might feel safe to then connect with you and share what they're feeling. I just think that's so important to mention that today. Mm-hmm. Okay, and we've got one more question I think we have time for. Dr. Neff, this should be a quick one. Do you have any suggestions for food or a good diet to help improve depression and anxiety?
Oh man, this is one of my favorite subjects. Because food really is where mood starts. And it's really hard to have a good mood when your food is low quality. So, basic features of a good diet: minimally processed, mostly plants, and plant diversity is really important. So, the average person eats 10 different types of vegetables, just generally. Expand that to 20, 30, 40, just on a regular basis, because plants have information in them. And we got all kinds of fancy names for that information: phytochemicals, antioxidants, terpenes, sterols. But what it really boils down to at the end of the day is like we're like a living reflection of plants on the earth. And the more we put in our body, the better. The research shows, for instance, that if you take a depressed person and put them on a Mediterranean diet, which is just, oily fish, minimally processed foods, lots of olive oil, nuts, lots of vegetable servings, that is as effective, if not more effective, than medication for mood.
Wow.
Okay, so it can't really be understated. The diet goes hand in hand with good mood. And I usually say that mood is like the canary in the coal mine. It's the first symptom of inflammation and poor diet is that you become irritable, you become less energetic. And it's something that's medicine you give yourself multiple times a day. So as you're eating, if you think to yourself, let's say you're like not excited about kale salad, but if you think about that, and you don't have to eat kale salad, that's not like the health food, but you're eating vegetables and maybe it's not like spectacular, but it's good information, and you start to think about, changing your relationship to the meal from, I want this to entertain me to, I want this to nourish me, it's a great way to proceed.
Yeah, great question. I'm so glad somebody asked that. So we got to mention the food. That is so important. So, okay, well, I think our time has come to an end today. Dr. Neff, thank you so much for taking the time today to share all your insights and expertise on this so important topic. We can all help prevent suicide. That's what we want to be doing, and we want to focus on that this month. And there is a 24/7 lifeline that is free and confidential. It can offer support for people in distress, as well as prevention and crisis resources for you or your loved ones, and also even best practices for professionals. So we want to be sure to mention this number here, which is 1-800-273-8255. And again, that number is 1-800-273-8255. And we'll put that in our comments as well. So again, Dr. Neff, thank you. I'm so excited about this new Aging Well series that we have begun with you.
Yes.
For those of you watching, Dr. Neff is going to be joining us for a series on various health topics around aging. And so we're just so delighted, and be on the lookout for more events with Dr. Neff. And if you would like to learn more about the All of Us research program, please visit our website at joinallofus.org/50forward. And you can learn how you can become 1 in a million with all of us. So thank you all for watching and tuning in, and everyone have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Kelsey.
Bye-bye.
Bye.